Imagine that you have so much cash that it is no longer possible to count it. It can only be weighed. It is not stored in a bank. No bank would be enough for it. It is hidden in the walls of houses, buried in fields, stuffed into old warehouses right up to the ceiling. And every month you spend $2,500 on just one small thing, on ordinary office rubber bands, the very ones used to bundle stacks of banknotes. Because there are so many stacks that rubber bands have to be purchased in huge batches, this film is a historical and documentary analysis of the criminal economy and its consequences. It does not justify the trade in substances, the activities of cartels, corruption, or violence. All sums and luxury items are presented here not as an example of success, but as evidence of the scale of the crime and the price that other people paid. This is how the man we are going to talk about today lived. His name was Pablo Escobar. At the peak of his criminal activity, his organization received so much illegal income that some of the money simply rotted in hiding places. Rats gnawed on the banknotes, dampness ate them away, and no one even had time to notice the loss. His own brother, who managed all the bookkeeping, later admitted every year they wrote off about a tenth of the fortune, simply because they physically could not keep track of such a mountain of money. And here is the first question that naturally arises. How did the son of a poor farmer from the Colombian hinterland come to lead one of the most destructive criminal structures, accumulate one of the largest criminal fortunes of his time, and what exactly did he invest this unthinkable wealth in? Houses, airplanes, a personal zoo, a prison built according to his own design, an island in the Caribbean Sea? All of this was real, and this is just the beginning of the list. Let us take it in order. Welcome to the channel for the richest.
Luxury life.
The boy who started with tombstones. He was born on December 1st, 1949, in the small town of Rio Negro. His father was a farmer, his mother was a schoolteacher, 7 children in the house. Money was always short. Nothing in this childhood hinted at future billions. As a teenager, Pablo was already hustling as best he could. He sold fake diplomas. He resold contraband electronics. According to one well-known story, he stole gravestones, erased the names from them, and sold them again. Then came stolen cars, and it was for car theft that he was first arrested in 1974, and then began the criminal career that made him one of the most notorious drug traffickers of the 20th century and brought years of violence to Colombia. In those years, Colombia was ideally located. Nearby were countries where raw materials for white powder were grown, and across the ocean was a huge market ready to pay any money. Escobar organized an international network for the illegal transportation of white powder. Along with the volume of drug trafficking, criminal revenues, corruption, and the number of human casualties grew. By the mid-80s, his organization, which the whole world came to know as the Medellin cartel, controlled, according to various estimates, up to 80% of all white powder entering the United States. 80% of a huge market in the hands of one man and his people. And here the numbers go from ordinary to almost unreal. But the most interesting thing is not even how much he earned. It is what he spent it all on. It is important to understand, this is not about entrepreneurial success, but about a criminal system that existed thanks to drug trafficking, corruption, threats, and murders. The criminal network that received $420 million a week. Let us pause on this figure because it is difficult to grasp the first time. According to estimates, at its peak, the cartel brought in about $420 million a week. Not a year, a week. If you break that down by day, it comes out to about $60 million a day. Every morning, his criminal network received more than many large companies earn in an entire year. Forbes magazine, the very one that counts the planet's billionaires, included Escobar's name in its famous list of the richest people in the world for 7 years in a row, for the first time in 1987. From that moment on, the Colombian stood in the same row with industrialists and financiers whose fortunes were built over decades of honest business. His personal fortune was estimated differently, somewhere around $25 billion, somewhere closer to 30. And this is in the money of that time, which would be worth noticeably more today. But unlike a legal business, this entire fortune was created through drug trafficking, corruption, and violence. To make it completely clear, he was called richer than the Mexican drug lord El Chapo, whom the world learned about much later. The difference in their fortunes is by several multiples. Escobar was not just a rich man of his country, he was among the 10 richest people on the entire earth. what these figures actually meant. There is one problem with large numbers. They are easy to pronounce, but almost impossible to feel. $60 million a day. What does that even mean? Let us translate it into understandable terms. 60 million a day means that in 1 hour, his criminal network received about $2.5 million. In a minute, while you are listening to this story, over $40,000 accrued. In the time you are watching this video, sums that another person would not earn in a lifetime flowed into his pockets at those rates. A fortune of 25 to 30 billion in the early 90s is so much that one could have bought tens of thousands of luxurious houses with that money back then, or assembled a fleet of thousands of private airplanes, or, as we will yet see, seriously offer to pay off the debts of an entire country, and at the same time, he was alone. Not a corporation with thousands of shareholders, not an oil power. One man, raised in a home where there was not always enough to eat. This is why it is important to analyze this scale not as a success story, but as an example of how destructive a criminal economy can become. What matters are not the numbers themselves, but the gap between what he started with and what he ended up owning. And the first thing he did when the money became more than the places to store it was to build himself a house. Except the word house does not fit here at all. Asienda Napoles, an estate the size of a small town. When people say a rich man has a big mansion, they usually imagine a beautiful house with a garden, a pool, maybe a tennis court. Forget that. Escobar's estate, called Asienda Napoles, occupied about 20 square kilometers. That is about 7,000 acres of land. Not a house with a plot, a whole territory comparable in area to a small town. He built it in the late 70s, not far from the Magdalena River, between Medellin and Bogota. According to estimates, the construction cost about $63 million. And on this land was everything that could possibly come into the head of a person with no limits on his wallet. A football field, a bullfighting arena, artificial lakes, its own airfield with a runway so he could land right at his doorstep, tennis courts, and even a track in the spirit of Formula One racing on which he could race sports cars. And also huge life-size dinosaur sculptures placed right in the middle of the greenery to entertain children. All this ostentatious luxury was paid for with criminal proceeds, behind which stood addiction, corruption, and violence. Guests were hosted here with a sculpt that is difficult to imagine. According to Argentine journalists, for his 33rd birthday in 1982, Escobar threw a party that lasted a whole month. Every evening, new musicians, new artists, not a one-night party. A month of demonstrative wastefulness on an estate the size of a city. But even the football field and the racing track did not make this place truly special. The most unusual thing awaited guests a little further away. There, where animals that had never existed in South America roamed behind a fence. Elephants, giraffes, and 4 hippos that changed a whole region. At the heart of Asienda Napoles was a real zoo, not a couple of cages for decoration, a full-fledged collection of animals from all continents. Elephants, giraffes, zebras, antelopes, ostriches, exotic birds, camels, ponies. Escobar brought animals here from all over the world so that any guest driving along the paths would feel like they were on a safari. And in 1981, he added 4 hippos to the collection, 3 females and 1 male. They were brought from a nursery in the American state of Texas. Heavy African giants, each weighing several tons, settled in the artificial lakes of the estate. And here begins a story that is hard to believe. After Escobar's death, the zoo was essentially abandoned. Most of the animals were given away and transported out. But the hippos could not be transported. Too heavy, too dangerous. They were simply left. And they began to do what they do best: reproduce. In the warm, humid climate of Colombia, without natural enemies, without hunters, they began to multiply at a rate that does not even occur in their native Africa. 4 hippos over several decades turned into a herd. According to research in recent years, there are already from 170 to over 200 of them. They have spread along the Magdalena River and are encountered tens of kilometers from the former estate. They wander into villages, scare fishermen. Once a hippo wandered right onto a schoolyard. The authorities have declared them a dangerous invasive species, and in the spring of 2026, the country approved a plan to reduce the population. It concerns the fate of about 80 animals. Think about it. The man has been gone for over 30 years. His cartel was destroyed long ago, yet the living trace of his whims still wanders through Colombian rivers and scares entire villages. Few manage to leave such a strange legacy. car collection, and the airplane that hung over the gates. If the zoo was a whim, then transport was a necessity, and at the same time, another showcase of wealth. Throughout the estate stood a collection of antique and luxury cars, motorcycles, and rare vehicles. Among them, he also kept a car riddled with bullets, which he passed off as the car of the famous robbers Bonnie and Clyde. Whether this is truth or a beautiful invention is still debated, but the detail itself says a lot about the man. It was not enough for him to just have expensive things. He needed things with a history and a legend, and above the main gates of the Hacienda hung a small airplane. Not a real one, a replica of a light single-engine Piper. This airplane was a symbol for Escobar. It is believed that it was on such a machine that his first shipment went out, the one that started everything. He hung the replica right above the entrance so that everyone entering would see. This is what this criminal system grew from. Later, when the estate was transferred to the state, the airplane was taken down from the gates, too blatant a monument to a criminal past. Garages, hangars, a runway right next door, it all worked like clockwork. A man managing a criminal network with such volumes of cash could not afford to get stuck in a traffic jam or wait for a flight. He moved as he pleased, whenever he pleased. But the little airplane over the gates was just a souvenir. The real estate and objects of this criminal structure were located far beyond the estate, up to and including a separate island in the Caribbean Sea. An island in the Caribbean Sea bought almost entirely. The town-sized estate already shows the scale of accumulated criminal revenues. But Escobar and his people were not content with just their own country. At the end of the 70s, the cartel got its hands on a whole island in the Caribbean Sea, Norman's Cay, a small scrap of land in the Bahamas archipelago, about 350 kilometers from the coast of Florida. And it is not about a house on the shore. Almost the entire territory of the island came under control. A runway about a kilometer long, a harbor, a hotel, residential houses, speedboats, airplanes. They even built a refrigerated warehouse there. In essence, it was a private transshipment base with its own infrastructure, a whole island working as a node of a huge network for several years, from the end of the 70s to the beginning of the 80s. Think about the scale of the criminal infrastructure. Control over an island was not an exotic purchase, but a part of an international drug trafficking system. Not a villa, not a yacht at the pier, but a whole island with an airfield and a port. Even for the majority of the richest people on the planet, such control over a whole island with an airfield and a port would be unusual. Here, it showed how far the criminal organization had spread its influence. And for this organization, the island was just one point on a huge map, and he had dozens of such points, big and small. Not one estate, but a whole map of properties. Asienda Napoles was the showcase, the ceremonial residence. But if you tried to map everything this man owned, the map would quickly be covered in dots. Apartments in the city, country houses, farms and ranches, dozens of hideouts and safe houses scattered across Medellin and its surroundings in case he had to disappear urgently. Many of these places he most likely visited only a few times, or even never. When there is so much money that it spoils faster than you can spend it, real estate is bought not for living, but almost like bags into which it is convenient to stuff capital. A house becomes not a home, but a way to turn another mountain of cash into something tangible. What happened after his death tells this best. The state began seizing his property, and the list turned out to be so long that some of the properties are still surfacing in court disputes decades later. Whole estates, buildings, plots of land, all of this once belonged to one man, who at the same time often slept in simple, nondescript houses, fleeing from enemies. The richest man in the country, who had so many roofs over his head that under some of them he never even fell asleep. And to tie this whole map of properties into a single network, transport was needed. And here again, the scale of the criminal infrastructure is visible. The cartel's transport network, 24 airplanes, helicopters, and even submarines. For comparison, an ordinary billionaire has a private airplane, maybe two if they fly in comfort often. At the disposal of Escobar and his criminal organization, there were more than 24, over 20 airplanes, among them a Learjet business jet and additionally 6 helicopters, a whole air fleet that would do honor to a small airline. And that is not all. At his disposal were speedboats, yachts, and, this now sounds almost unbelievable, submarines. Yes, one man had his own submarine transport. When you read something like that, it seems as if we are talking about a fictional villain from an action movie, not a real person who lived quite recently in the memory of people still living today. This fleet was not a toy, but a working tool of a gigantic mechanism. Through it flowed streams measured in tons per day. According to some data, more than 15 tons of illegally transported white powder per day. Pilots working these routes received whole fortunes for a single flight. Sums reached up to $500,000 per flight. $500,000 for one flight. These were payments for participation in an international crime that threatened the pilots with prison, violent death, or reprisals from the cartel itself. To understand the scale, I will add one more figure. When the authorities got to one of the cartel's major production points, it turned out that this point alone produced around 20 tons of illegal narcotic per month. 1 point, and there were many such points in the network. Monthly volumes were measured in tens of tons, 70, 80 tons leaving in one direction. For comparison, an ordinary truck carries about 20 tons. That is, it was about entire convoys of trailers, only hidden in airplanes, speedboats, and secret compartments. This is where those hundreds of millions a week, so hard to believe, came from. When a criminal organization has such a logistics system, obtaining illegal money ceases to be its main problem. They become a storage problem. And this, as strange as it may sound, was one of the main problems of the man who is called one of the richest criminals in history. The problem of criminal cash, where the cartel hid money. Most people think all their lives about how to earn. Escobar thought about where to put the criminal cash. This may sound like a fantasy about limitless wealth, but it was about illegal money that was impossible to store or use safely. Cash came in such a flow that ordinary storage methods could not cope. It was hidden in the walls of houses, buried in fields, stacked in abandoned warehouses. Hiding places were stuffed with banknotes to capacity, and still, there was more money than places where it could be hidden. And then began what I already mentioned at the very beginning. The money spoiled. Rats gnawed on it. Dampness ate it away. Banknotes rotted in the ground and molded in the walls. Escobar's brother and chief accountant later estimated these losses. About 10% of the entire fortune was written off every year. In recalculation, around $2 billion annually simply disappeared. Not on luxury, not on bribes. Simply spoiled and vanished because it is physically impossible to keep track of such a mountain of paper. This is where those rubber bands for $2,500 a month came from. When there is so much money that it constantly needs to be banded into stacks, even a penny trifle turns into a serious expense item. Imagine a bookkeeping department where rubber bands purchased in huge batches pass as a separate line item. And yet he tried to move some of the money to a more reliable place where neither rats nor the Colombian police could reach it. Outside the country. Billions hidden in a foreign country. When you have so much cash that it rots in fields, sooner or later the question arises, how to move part of this money to a safe place? Escobar's answer was befitting his scale. He turned to neighboring Panama. According to reports from that time, in the early 80s, the cartel paid the Panamanian General Manuel Noriega, the de facto ruler of the country, around $350 million. Payment for a service, to hide billions in the banks of Panama, away from prying eyes. For a time, a whole country turned into one giant safe for Escobar. But such alliances have a short life. Relations soured, the money was frozen at some point. And then, according to those same reports, the cartel placed a bounty on the head of yesterday's partner, about $1 million. A man who had just been paid hundreds of millions turned into a target overnight. This was the world he lived in. Today, you pay the ruler of an entire country like an ordinary contractor. Tomorrow, you put a hunt out on him. Loyalty here was bought and immediately sold back. But not all his wealth was hidden abroad. Some of it, on the contrary, he put on display in the very heart of his native city. The Monaco building, an apartment that no longer exists. In the city, Escobar had his own multi-story building known as Monaco. Inside, not just a rich apartment, but a whole collection, expensive furniture, art objects, everything that can be bought with limitless money. This was his city lair, a symbol of status, visible to everyone who passed by. It was this building that was once struck by the war he himself had started with his enemies. In 1988, a powerful bomb was planted under Monaco. The building withstood the blast, but the explosion dealt a terrible blow to what was closest. His little daughter Manuela suffered. The girl developed serious hearing problems. They say that it was that explosion that became one of the heaviest wounds for Escobar. Money, with which he could buy almost everything, did not protect his own child. And now the most telling part. Decades later, the authorities of Medellin made a decision that says a lot about the city's attitude to its past. In 2019, the Monaco building was demolished. In its place, a park was laid out, a memorial in memory of those who suffered from the violence of that era. Not a museum to the drug lord, not a place of pilgrimage for fans, a monument to the victims. The city seemed to erase the symbol of one man's power to return the space to the thousands of nameless people to whom that era brought grief. This is an important thought to which we will return, because behind the glitter of airplanes and zoos always stood a bill that was paid by completely different people. But first, let us look into an ordinary day of a man with a fortune of tens of billions. An ordinary day of a man with a $30 billion fortune. What did a simple day of such a man look like? Definitely not like that of an ordinary billionaire with a schedule of meetings and business lunches. The morning could start late. He was a known night owl, loved to work and socialize at night and sleep during the day. Breakfast at the estate, where elephants and giraffes roamed under the windows. Then an endless stream of affairs, calls, orders, meetings with people, decisions on which fates depended. All this was interspersed with football, which he adored. On his own field at the Hacienda, he played ball himself and invited others to play. He loved to live large, but at the same time, many noted a strange detail. In everyday life, he could be surprisingly simple. Simple clothes, jeans, sneakers. A man who had more money than some states did not always look like he was from the cover of a magazine. His luxury was not in suits, it was in the scale of what he owned. In the evenings and nights, the estate came alive. Music, guests, parties that could last for days. And somewhere nearby, in fields and warehouses, lay tons of money that he did not even have time to properly spend. From the outside, it looked like a life in which any wish was instantly fulfilled, and limitations seemed not to exist at all, although such an illusion rested on crime, fear, and violence. And yet, a shadow constantly hung over this picture. The larger the criminal network became, the more enemies there were. But before reaching the finale, let us look where he especially demonstratively showed his wealth. This scope was part of an image of power and impunity. Ostentatious luxury, from caviar to world football stars. Since we are talking about luxury, let us see exactly how he lived when he wanted to make an impression. This luxury was part of the image of power and impunity he created, and from the outside, the picture really looked almost like from a movie. Looking a little ahead, let us recall that very prison that he would later build for himself. There, where an ordinary prisoner would choke on institutional food, Escobar was served stuffed turkey, caviar, fresh salmon, smoked trout. Not prison slop, a restaurant menu with a view of the mountains. Bars with large televisions, billiards, a discotheque where he even managed to host wedding celebrations. Football was his true passion, and money allowed him to invite those whom others only watched on television as guests. Professional players came to his personal field. According to a well-known story, one of the greatest footballers in history dropped by to see him, an Argentine star of global scale who was just serving a sports disqualification and agreed to play a match for a fee. Where ordinary people hang posters of idols on the wall, Escobar simply invited these idols to his place. His parties became known for their scale. That month-long celebration of his 33rd birthday on the estate is just one example. Musicians replaced each other every evening. Artists, female guests, winners of beauty contests were frequent visitors to his domains. Criminal proceeds allowed him to pay for virtually any caprice. However, behind this display stood bribery, threats, and human victims. And yet, his most dangerous purchase was not caviar or football stars. The most dangerous thing was that for money, he bought power. Number 1. How cash turned into power. In the Colombia of those years, a short and terrible formula circulated associated with his name: silver or lead. The meaning is simple: either you take the money and do as needed, or you refuse and pay the price. This was not an effective formula or a show of charisma, but a system of coercion. Consent was bought with money, and refusal could cost a person their life. Through this system, he and his people people influenced officials, judges, and politicians for years. Some were bought, some preferred not to get involved. Money opened doors that would otherwise have remained locked forever. It got to the point that in 1982, Escobar himself stepped into big politics. He was elected as an alternate deputy to the lower house of parliament, formally a people's representative, in reality, a man whose fortune allowed him to influence those who write the laws. Through politics, he also hoped to shield himself from his main nightmare, extradition overseas. This deputy page lasted very briefly. As soon as his real affairs were spoken about openly, his political career collapsed. But the fact itself is telling. Money gave him not only houses, animals, and airplanes, it bought him a seat at the table where the fate of an entire country was decided. And it was precisely the feeling of almost limitless power that pushed him to a proposal that took the breath away of many. The man who offered to pay off an entire country's debt. Here is a detail after which you truly understand the scale of his fortune. At some point, a threat loomed over Escobar that he feared more than prison and almost more than death: extradition to the United States. A trial awaited him there, one he could not influence, and he, according to reports of that time, made the Colombian authorities an astonishing proposal. He was ready to close the entire national debt of the country, about $10 billion, in exchange for one thing, that he not be extradited overseas. Just think about this phrase. One man offers to pay the debts of an entire state out of his own pocket, not to donate to a hospital, not to build a couple of schools, to pay off the country's debt completely. History knows very few proposals of this kind. This power also had a second face, without which the story would be dishonest. In the poor neighborhoods of Medellin, many considered Escobar almost a benefactor. He built housing for those who had none, laid out football fields, gave away money. A whole district still bears a name associated with him. There stand houses that he gave to the poor. Thus, among part of the population, an image of a local Robin Hood was formed, an image that concealed the criminal origin of the money and the price of such generosity. But this generosity also had a reverse side, which cannot be left unmentioned. Behind the wealth and gifts stood thousands of destroyed lives. That era brought Colombia years of violence, fear, and loss, and the count ran to thousands of victims. Among them were also completely innocent people. Any gilded story about airplanes and zoos ultimately runs into this price. And this is precisely why the next chapter of his life looks almost like a mockery of the very concept of justice. The prison he built for himself. In 1991, cornered from all sides, Escobar made a deal with the authorities. The conditions showed how strongly the criminal tried to subordinate justice to his own interests. He agreed to surrender and go to prison, but on one condition: he would build the prison himself, according to his own design, and he would choose who would guard him. Thus appeared a place that went down in history under the name La Cathedral, the Cathedral, except it resembled a prison the least. Journalists immediately nicknamed it Hotel Escobar and Club Medellin, and not without reason. What was there? A football field, a jacuzzi, a waterfall, a bar, a discotheque, a billiard room, a sauna, according to some descriptions, even a dollhouse for his daughter, and a bedroom with a round rotating bed, a kitchen where delicacies were served. The construction cost, according to estimates, about $25 million. This was not a cell, it was a mountain resort with a view of his hometown. The prisoner was guarded by his own people. Walls and fences were built not to keep him inside, but to keep enemies out. He set up a powerful telescope and aimed it at the house in the city where his family lived, watching his loved ones while talking to them on the phone at the same time. Guests freely came to him. According to counts, over 300 people visited there without any official permission. Once, the entire Colombian national football team came to play on his personal field ahead of a World Cup qualifier. The guards that day served drinks and worked as waiters. From this cathedral, he continued to manage his criminal network as if nothing had happened. Telephones, radios, fax were at hand. The state pretended that the man was sitting in prison. In reality, he lived in luxury and held all the strings. The authorities' patience snapped when it became clear. Inside the walls, things were happening that should not happen even in freedom. They decided to transfer him to a real prison, and then the finale began. The escape through his own wall and the hunt for the head of the cartel. In July 1992, when the army surrounded La Cathedral, Escobar simply walked away. He had foreseen a path for retreat in advance. Part of the wall was deliberately made less strong and was subsequently used as a pre-prepared exit. The most guarded prisoner of the country left through his own loophole and vanished. Thus began the last year and a half of his life, already without estates, without a zoo, without a resort prison, on the run, and now the whole world stood against him. A special unit was thrown into his capture, nicknamed the Search Block, a detachment of several hundred fighters trained with the participation of American specialists. A reward was placed on the capture of yesterday's head of the Medellin cartel. Every step he took was tracked, every call was tried to be traced. But it was not only the actions of the security forces that led to his downfall. In parallel with the state, a shadow from his own past hunted him. A group of people calling themselves those persecuted by Pablo Escobar. These were his enemies and traitors from his own world, who decided to answer him in his own coin. They methodically destroyed his people. According to various estimates, this war and confrontation with competitors cost the lives of more than 300 of his associates and relatives. The criminal network he had been building for years fell apart before his eyes, man by man, house by house. And here, in these last months, occurred that very episode that crossed out all the glitter of his wealth with one single picture. $2 million thrown into a fire. Now he had neither an estate with elephants, nor a fleet of airplanes, nor a resort prison, only hideouts, constant relocations, and fear. And it is here that there is a detail that shows the underside of his wealth better than any billion-dollar figures. Hiding in the cold mountains with his little daughter, according to accounts from his close ones, he burned about $2 million in cash. Just burned it to warm his child and build a fire. Money that a whole family could live on comfortably for decades turned into firewood over one cold night. At that moment, his fortune, which previously seemed all-powerful, was worth absolutely nothing. Ordinary banknotes in a fire warmed best of all. The denouement came on December 2, 1993, the day after his 44th birthday. This final scene is important to perceive as the conclusion of a documentary chronicle, and not as a heroic episode. After a long hunt, the special unit tracked down his hideout in Medellin. He tried to escape across the rooftops, and there, on the roof of an ordinary city house, everything ended. The man who was among the 10 richest people on the planet, owned a fleet of airplanes and a personal zoo, died on the tiles a few steps from neighboring windows. No billions in fields and walls could help him anymore. And here arises a question that pulls the whole story along with it. What became of all this unimaginable wealth? Where did the estates, the animals, the houses, the tons of money and hiding places go? And what became of those for whom, as he liked to repeat, all this was started, his own family? The family behind the golden cage. There is a side to this story that is often forgotten behind the glitter of airplanes. Escobar had a family. His wife's name was Maria Victoria. He married her when she was very young. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, Manuela, that very girl who suffered from the explosion under the Monaco building. It would seem that the children of the man who was called one of the richest criminals on the planet should have been drowning in happiness. In reality, their childhood passed in a golden cage. Constant fear. Relocations. Guards. Enemies who could strike at any moment. The most expensive toys, and at the same time, the impossibility of calmly going out onto the street. Remember that episode with the 2 million burned in the fire? After all, this was not a rich man's ostentatious stunt. It was a father warming his frozen daughter with the only thing that happened to be at hand in the mountains: packs of money. The best illustration of what all this wealth actually cost for those closest to him. After the father's death, the family had to flee the country and literally start life anew, under different names, hiding from revenge. The son, over time, changed his name and became a completely different person. He grew up, studied, wrote books, and now openly says that his father's path is not an example to follow, but a warning. The son of the head of a criminal network through which tens of billions of dollars passed, chose to live honestly and quietly by ordinary labor. And in this choice, perhaps, there is more meaning than in all the airplanes and zoos put together. What remains? Hippos, an amusement park, and a quiet monastery. The most curious thing in this story is what his legacy turned into. Not into the bank accounts of heirs, but into completely unexpected things. Take Asienda Napoles. After the owner's death, the state took over the estate. Many buildings were demolished or remodeled, and on the remaining land, they did what Escobar definitely did not plan. They opened an amusement park. Today there, where one man once walked with his guests, operates a water park with slides and pools, a zoo with African animals, and a hotel. Families with children come there to relax, having no idea that they are riding slides on land bought with money from one of the most destructive criminal systems of the century. And in the neighboring lakes and rivers, the descendants of those very 4 hippos still swim. La Cathedral, the luxurious prison resort, stood abandoned for years. Looters stole everything of value from there. Pipes, tiles, even roofing materials. Rumors circulated that Escobar had hidden canisters with millions in the prison, and treasure hunters turned everything there upside down. Nothing, according to reports, was ever found. And later, the authorities handed over the territory to Benedictine monks. Today, on the site of the former Hotel Escobar is a quiet monastery and a center that the monks themselves call a place of memory for the victims of violence, not a monument to a drug lord. There, where a discotheque once thundered, prayers now sound. And the fate of the city building Monaco, as we have already said, turned out the same. It was razed to the ground, and a park was laid out on this spot in memory of the victims. Part of the lands of the former estate, the state transferred to women whose families suffered in the long Colombian conflict. Wealth built on someone else's grief is slowly being returned to those who paid for it. That is how it turned out that from the man who was one of the richest on earth, what remained were not palaces and not accounts, but a park with slides, a herd of feral hippos, and a monastery on the site of his personal prison. History itself seemed to put everything in its place. Perhaps that is why the story of Pablo Escobar still catches so much attention, not because he was rich, but because all this unthinkable luxury was ultimately worth absolutely nothing. And you know what the most interesting part is? The hippos in the Colombian rivers, it seems, will outlive the memory of the man himself. Write in the comments everything you think about this and subscribe to the channel for the richest. Here it is about luxury, wealth, and the lives of the most influential people on the planet. And right now, watch the previous episodes that have already appeared on your screen.